You said you were working 8 hours.
All right. Let's go ahead and get started now. All right, before the workshop goes ahead and gets started, we're going to talk a bit about a high level of what we're going to be talking about during the workshop. But beforehand, just make sure you have Git and Node installed. Everything else is done through Node. And then this next command, this first command where you initialize the repository, takes a minute to run. So in your code folder, I'd go ahead and run this npx create React app Gator chat, or whatever you want to call the project. Let me know if you guys want me to like stay on the slide a bit longer. Did anyone go to the career fair today or on Monday? One person?
Wow, Monday.
Monday?
Nice. How was it?
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. What year are you?
Freshman.
It's always rough for freshmen, yeah.
Usually fall is better, I would say. Because spring the companies like aren't as good.
Fall is good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Stuff. They usually show like the company list before, so like that's the best bet. Checking there.
I mean, like I got there, looked at the company list.
Yeah.
Like, no.
Yeah.
All right, are we all good for this? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So last week's GBM, we put out these two links, but I have them here a second time. We have two openings on our executive board, one for workshop lead and then one for training lead. Workshop lead, we're looking for anyone who has any like technical knowledge, anyone who's more experienced. If not technical knowledge, just the ability to learn fast. Just updated on modern technologies, what the industry currently uses. Besides that, training lead is more simple. It's just MERN stack. We have a Clubfinity developer training program where we teach people MERN stack. That one is more asynchronous though. So they learn it on their own. You would just be there to answer questions and then manage the training program. So that one's a lot less commitment, I would say. Next on the right side is our dev team applications. So like I mentioned before, Clubfinity. How many of you have heard of Clubfinity? All right, most of you. Clubfinity is SEC's project that we run over the past couple of years now. We're on the tail end of it being complete, but it's a mobile app that we run using MERN stack, like I just talked about. If you scan that QR code, if you're not experienced, we can put you through our beginner program. That takes a semester where we teach you all of the technologies you need for that. It also puts some great technologies on your resume if you're looking for internships or any other experience like that. If you are more advanced and you make it onto the dev team, we put you in through bi-weekly sprints. I think the dev team right now is around like 20 to 30 people. But yeah, it's super active, super great experience. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started with that. And I'll let Daniel take over from here.
Yeah. So today we're gonna be going over like modern web development, so React and then Firebase. So it's kind of three parts. So the intro is basically just going over web development, kind of a little bit of like the history. Then we're gonna go into React and like the benefits of React. And then lastly, we're gonna go into Firebase, kind of go over that as well. And then Sarab is gonna do a demo for you guys, kind of a basic web app with React and Firebase. So you can go to the next slide. So here's some of the core components. First off, have any of you guys done a project or worked with the MERN stack previously? One person? All right, so two, okay. A couple people. It's a pretty popular framework, especially starting out. And that's because it's relatively easy to use and set up as well. So you're gonna see on the front end, which is what the users are interacting with, that's gonna comprise of HTML. That's basically the web layout. That's what allows it to run on a website. And then CSS for styling, you get frameworks like Tailwind or Material UI. That's what allows it to look good and be appealing to users. And then also incorporating JavaScript, and React, which is a JavaScript framework. And that allows components to be interactive and kind of communicate together. And for that, you allow for real-time events as well. On the back end, which is kind of the server side, so the things behind the scene, you're going to see frameworks like Node.js, which is what allows the JavaScript code to run. And so you're going to see that. You're going to see Express, which allows for routing and middleware to allow the front end and the back end to communicate. And then things like REST APIs, you guys have probably heard those terms. And that also allows for communication with the client server, which is the backend. And then there's plenty of databases you could use for not from a non-relational standpoint. There's databases like MongoDB, which is really easy to use. If you're using Python as well, you can use something called Mongoose, and that allows MongoDB to be set up. And then that just stores your app data. So commonly you can store like user profiles if you're creating like a social media app, something like that. Today we're going to be going over mainly React in Firebase. So that's going to be just basic front end, and then also using Firebase for authentication and also as a database to store data as well. Oh, gotcha. So what makes modern web apps different? So before we were using things like PHP, old frameworks, things you don't really want to use. Now it's more so using JavaScript, TypeScript for safety, that sort of thing. And it's usually a mobile first design. So when you're creating a website, you're kind of thinking of a user who just has their phone, because everybody has a phone, right? So you're, ensuring that your styling is mobile first for the most amount of users. And basically for that, you can do things like mobile queries. That's a great thing in React, where you can create a separate section of code just for the mobile view. There's also real-time interactions. That's what JavaScript is for. It's for dynamic real-time updates. If you update your code, you want to see the events change in real time. And another thing is using cloud frameworks. So one benefit of Google Firebase is that you can host data on the cloud as well. And then another, thing about modern web apps is a better user experience. So that means that the website is loading fast. You're not waiting like a minute to load the website. It's a simple but aesthetic design. And then also the sections, you can transition smoothly. Users aren't having to wait like a minute or so to transition between pages or different sections of the website. So now we're going to go into more of React. So what is React? So from a dev experience, it's a good ecosystem of tools and libraries. So the main benefit of using React over, say, like something older like Angular or Vue.js is that it's constantly up to date. So it's what most modern companies use. You'll see companies like Facebook, Instagram, or really Meta, because they combine both. Meta and Netflix really use React for a lot of their tools as well. It's actually created by Meta, and it's constantly being updated today. And it's very easy to learn and good for simple projects. So another tutorial that really helped me out when I was starting with React was programming with Mosh. He's really good for like React, really any simple tutorial, MongoDB, that sort of thing as well. And so you'll see here, why would you want to use React versus Vue.js or Angular? So it's more component-based architecture. So you have reusable components you can use across different sections of the website. So say you're creating like a certain section of your page that you'd want to use not only on the home page, but say on the user profile page, something like that. That's where components come into play, because you can just easily import them onto that page. And then you have a virtual DOM, which is a efficient rendering system. Also, React uses JSX, which is basically HTML-like syntax in JavaScript. So that's a little fun fact. It uses JSX instead of just mainly JavaScript. And then, like I said before, it's used in major platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and then Netflix. So now we're going to go more into like the Firebase side of things. So what is Firebase? So at its core, Firebase is a authentication in a database management system. So it's also, it's been acquired by Google back in 2014, and it allows for efficient backend that's very scalable as well. Serverless architecture, so you can host things on the cloud, that sort of thing as well. And then it's real-time updates for your database. So Firebase has something called the real-time database. So that's basically for, if you're having a larger project, you're not going to really use it for these smaller projects you're creating. Today, we're just going to be using Firestore and the authentication version. But for larger, like production-based projects, you could use real-time database, and that allows for efficient updates as well. And then it's easy to implement, and it's really good for scalability. So one thing is that if you guys went to Swamp Hacks, or you guys are doing any hackathons, anything like that, it's a really good framework to use, not only for your database, but if you're using authentication as well for users. So you can see here some of the key services that they have. So for data, they have Firestore, which is their database. It's good for authentication, login, sign up. You can also import your social profiles. And then it's also good for hosting, and then Cloud Functions as well. And then, yeah, like I said before, it's pretty much everything you need right out of the box. So for authentication, you have multiple ways to sign in. You have a secure way to store users and store user profiles. And then you can integrate, Google sign in or any other social media sign in an easy way. And then it also has ready to use UI elements. So when you're creating your login or sign up page for your project, it really helps out with that as well. And then here are some of the database tools as well. So there's a real-time database for larger projects. You have Google Firestore, and then you also have, it also allows for Cloud Functions for offline support. And then, yeah, so now Sarab is going to go into a demo, and that's pretty much just the intro of React and Firebase.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. I'm gonna go ahead and switch over the screen. Yeah, so you guys should have run the npx create react app, sec react firebase workshop command in your terminal. Is that done? Raise your hands. Okay, good. Yeah, so what I'm gonna do is type in code and then the name of the folder that I just created. And what that does is it opens up the file in VS Code. Nice. Okay. Is everyone able to get to this step at least? Cool. Yeah, so we can type in npm start and that starts up the node server. And in a second, so I think there's currently some dependency issues with my version of React. So I'm going to run into an issue here. Yeah, report web vitals. Report web vitals is not something we need, so we can go ahead. That's in the index.js file, and just remove these last couple lines. Report web vitals, and then here as well. Actually, let me share to the Zoom recording right now as well. Yes. All right, so now you should see something like this. Do you guys see that? All right, cool. Yeah, so back to VS Code now. What we can do is just remove all this boilerplate code that just renders that image that we just saw on screen. Okay, let me pull this up. And now what we can do is change this to say something like hello world. Hello world. So yeah, that is there any way to minimize this? So is anyone familiar with this syntax from HTML? Has anyone worked with HTML in the past? Cool. So you should be like roughly familiar with the syntax. What React does is you'll notice this is a JavaScript file. It's actually rendering what's called JSX, like Daniel mentioned, which you can write the code in JavaScript, but it converts it to HTML so that it can be rendered on the web page. So that's why you can render stuff like this hello world. But yeah, in that case, let's go ahead and put a heading on the screen. Let's call it Gator Chat. And let's add a section here where we're going to have all of our messages. So it should look something like this. Gator Chat and then the messages. All right, so that is the basics of React. They're not really the basics. We don't really cover React much, but we're gonna go ahead and get started with Firebase. So if you can go to your Firebase, go to this URL, it's console.firebase.google.com. And then you should see something like this. I currently have a couple projects in Firebase already, so my screen might look slightly different than yours. Sorry, here's the URL, console.firebase.google.com. Cool. And then click create a project. And then we can give our project a name, SEC React Firebase Workshop. Continue. Let's just skip this. Default account, create project. Is everyone able to make it to the step that I'm currently on, or does anyone need a bit more time? Cool. So Firebase, like Daniel mentioned, is going to allow us to do our database in the back end, and then also authentication for new users to log in and then view who the current user is, rather than having to do all of that stuff ourselves. Firebase handles all of that for us. So now we have a project called SEC React Firebase Workshop. Yeah, so we can go into the web button. We're not going to create an Apple or Android app right now. We're just going to create a web app. And let's call it SEC React Firebase Workshop Register app. Cool. So now you'll see all of this code here. Yeah, and what that means is we'll go here, copy this, and then go back into our code. So at the top of our code, we don't need this import logo line anymore. What we do need is to import React, use ref, use state from React. And we'll cover a bit more about what that means later. By the way, is that font size good, or you need me to zoom in? Let me try. Is that any better? Cool. So now we're going to import Firebase from Firebase/compat/app. We're going to import Firebase/compat/auth for authentication, and then Firebase/compat/firestore, which is going to handle all of the backend databases, backend storage. Two more lines. We're going to import use auth state from React Firebase hooks/auth, and then import use collection. I should say use collection from React Firebase hooks/firestore. Just these lines. We do. So next step right now is to open up a new terminal. We're going to type in npm install Firebase and then react-firebase-hooks. And then hit enter. And now this is going to import all of the packages that we just imported here. You'll notice that when you ran the npx create react app command, what that did is it created all the boilerplate code like git ignore, which already ignores the node modules folder. Node modules folder is where all these libraries are actually stored, and it's super heavy, which is why you don't want to push this up if you're pushing up to a GitHub repository, or if you're sharing the repository with anyone else. So that's why it's really convenient to use the create react app command. It ignores a lot of these files that we don't need. It creates, I believe it creates a git initialization for your project. But yeah. So we imported Firebase as we should. And now our app still looks like this. Now the next step is to go ahead and initialize our Firebase project. So Firebase dot initialize app, and then we're going to go ahead and paste all of the things we just copy pasted. Let's remove this line. And then, so it should look something like this. And what that's doing is connecting our project with the Firebase project we just created in the console. Next step is to initialize the Firebase authentication and the Firestore as well that we just imported up above. So that part seems super confusing. We'll get back to that in a bit, so you can understand what I really did here. But for now, just think of it as import statements that we'll call later on. Cool. So first thing we want to do is allow the user to sign into the app using the authentication. So let's create a function called sign in. So like I said before, React is written in JavaScript, but it converts all of the things that we render into HTML on the web page. So something like this, we're going to say constant sign in with Google equals this. And if you're not familiar with JavaScript, this format looks super confusing. But what you essentially need to know is that these parentheses represent the parameters of the function. This represents the body of the function. So in the body of this function, sign in with Google, we're going to set the provider to new firebase.auth, Google auth provider. So the authentication is going to be done through Google. And then auth.sign in with pop-up provider. And now each function, if we want to use it as a component, we're going to have to return something. So let's return a button. And in that button, it should say sign in with Google. And then when that button is clicked, we're going to set an on-click event to say sign in with Google. So now our page, sorry, I'll get back to that in a second. It's not on our page yet because we haven't put it here. So if we put it here, it might look something like this. Cool. So we have a sign in with Google, and when you click the button, okay, there's an error. We'll fix that in a second. But essentially, it'll bring up the Google sign in button. Here, I'll put the function back up on screen if anyone needs to copy it still. Sorry? The app function, yeah. The app function, we haven't really written anything so far. What you'll notice is there's one main div, there's a header at the top that just has the title of the app. And then there's a section div which has just some basic text, and then the sign-in function that we have to fix in a second. All right, so in this app function, we're gonna, above the return statement, we're gonna set a constant user variable, and we're gonna say use auth state, and we're gonna set it to auth. And auth is just referencing the Firebase authentication that we talked about earlier. Let's see if that fixes the issue. Shoot, I need to plug my laptop in. All right, so now let's see if it works. Okay, still same issue. Maybe once we finish writing the rest of the code, that issue will get fixed. While we do a sign in function, let's also create a sign out function. So that sign out function is going to look like, again, return. In that return statement, we're going to say auth current user and button. Okay, so I'm going to pause here real quick. Does anyone understand what this syntax is saying? So let me open up a notepad real quick. A and B. How do I zoom in? Okay. All right, so if you're a computer, if you're trying to execute the value of this command, A and B, you know that this can only be true if both A and B are true. If A is false, then we don't have to execute B. We can kind of just skip that. If A is true, then we do have to check B. So now sometimes in JavaScript, people like to replace B with an expression, so that if A and then will be a condition. So if A is true, then we know to check B as well. And then what that means is executing the expression. If A is false, then we can skip the expression. And what that essentially becomes is if condition, then expression.
What do you see like a ternary?
Ternary operator is another thing that people tend to use. So condition, expression, and then other expression. So in this case, I don't know why JavaScript convention just tends to hate the if statement for some reason. But if you see this is just saying if condition then expression. If you see something like this is saying if condition then expression, else other expression. So the ternary operator is the condition, and then the expression if the condition is true, and then the other expression if the condition is false. I think the Python syntax is a bit different. It's like expression, if condition, else other expression. I don't want to get too deep into that. That's irrelevant from this workshop. I just want you guys to know what I'm writing so you guys don't get confused. If you are interested, the same logic kind of applies, or I should say the opposite logic. If someone were to write condition or expression, then we know to check expression if condition is false. And then we can skip that otherwise. People tend to not use this one as much. But yeah, just basic intro. I don't want to get too in-depth again, but yeah, so essentially what we've done here is if the current user is authorized, if the current user is logged in and that value is not null, then we're going to render this button. The button says sign out. Because we know that if there's no current user, then we don't need to have that sign out button. That's why we're skipping that. This is called short circuiting. And then on click equals, and then you'll see the same syntax as before where the on click event calls this function. The function takes in no parameters, but it executes auth.sign out. I don't think this will work now. Yeah, we still need to. Let me try to restart the node server. Give that a second. Still not working. All right. Let's just continue for now. I think I'm missing some code later on that should fix that function. Sign in with Google. Sign out. And let's go ahead and put that sign out button somewhere here. Now we're going to create a function for the chat room. I haven't really introduced what we're going to be building yet, but let me see if I have it up currently. We're building a chat room essentially. So there's a sign-in functionality here where the user can sign in or sign out. Once they sign in, they can see all of their messages. So like here. So that's what we're going to be building by the end. That's why in this chat room function, we're going to say, all right, for now, let's just return some dummy value just to see if it is printing properly. Let's just say return chat room. So now on the front page, if we, sorry, I'll go back to that in a second. If we put the chat room function here, chat room, and then we can comment this out for now. We'll see the chat room is here. And then here's the chat room code again, for those of you who need it. All right, so now these messages have to be stored somewhere. Let's go back to Firebase console. We're gonna go back to the console. Over here, you should see storage. Sorry, here's authentication. Let's do authentication first, because this is what we were missing earlier on. We're gonna get started with authentication. We're gonna say additional providers Google, and then enable. I don't know, let's just say the same thing, React, Firebase, workshop, support email, I'll just put my own. Save. Cool, so I think that should have fixed the issue we were having earlier on. Where the user could not sign in. Cool. So sign in with Google is gonna let me sign into my account. I'll click continue. And now we're signed in. We can't really tell we're signed in now because we don't have anything to display it on the front end, but that's the authentication done. Is everyone still with me right now? I know we like just did the authentication so far, but let me know if I'm going too fast or anything.
Did you, what did you just do? Like on the fire?
Sure. So on Firebase, on the home page, do you see where it says authentication? You might have to scroll down a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so authentication. I think once you click that, there should be a couple buttons. You should click the one that says Google.
Yeah, I did that. I like it looks like here.
Still's giving you there. Try stopping and then restarting the npm console server. Any other issues before I go ahead too far and then you can't really come back? Did that fix it at all?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, like we did earlier, like you mentioned with the ternary operator, we're only going to want to sign in or show that sign in button if the user is logged in. So let's put curly braces in here. Say if user is the condition, and if the user is defined, then the condition is going to be true. If the user is not defined, that means no one is logged in, then the condition is going to be false. So if the user is logged in, then we're going to display the chat room. Otherwise, if the user is not logged in, then we're going to have the sign in button. Cool. So let's see if that works. So currently we're signed in, so it's showing chat room. If we sign out, it'll show sign in with Google. And sign back in, it'll update immediately. It says chat room again. Now that's essentially the basics of what we want, except now it's time to make the actual chat room. What we want to do is have a database that displays on screen and then a database that we can update from the actual front end. So let's return to the chat room function down here. So now what we're going to do is refer to messages. So we can't really refer to messages if there's nothing in the database yet. So we're going to go back to the Firebase console like we did with authentication. Click the button that says Cloud Firestore. So there's two things that we're going to be using from Firebase. The authentication we already completed. Now next is Firestore. Firestore, we're going to create a database. Sure, let's click next. Let's just start in production mode. We'll get to that in a second. All right, so this is essentially our database right now. What we want to do for the chat room is have somewhere to store all of the messages that have been sent so far and messages that we're going to send as well. So what that's called is a collection. Let's call the collection just messages. Next, for the document ID, just click auto ID. It's going to auto generate some random text. In the field, we'll do, I believe it was text. For the value, let's just put hello world. We're going to create a field called created at. We're going to set the type of that to, where is it? Timestamp. And then timestamp, let's just set it to the current time, current date. And then we can save that. Cool. So now what we have here is a collection called messages. In that collection is a document. Now the ID doesn't really mean anything to us because it's just gibberish. But once we click that document, we see a created at date and then text that says hello world. So now back to the code, we're going to define a variable called messages reference. And what that's going to call is firestore.collection. And then the name that we just gave the collection, it was messages. We're going to set a query to get the most recent messages. So ordered by the created at date. And then we're going to limit it to 25. For now, we're going to have a messages variable that says use collection query. And this allows us to access the documents within that collection that we're referencing earlier on. Cool. So now back to the chat room. Let's take away this. Let's create a main section. And now we're gonna take the logic we just talked about earlier, messages and messages.docs.map. And now again, messages it's not even a Boolean, but it's something that's called truthy or falsy in JavaScript. So if the messages is currently referring to something, that means if the array is empty, it's going to return a falsy value. If the array has elements in it, it's going to return a truthy value. So if the messages array is populated, then we're going to display this. Messages.docs.map. Map is JavaScript's way of saying like a for each loop. So for each document, we're going to execute this function. We're going to say, all right, for now, let's just say print doc.data.text. Let's see if that works. Docs.map. Sorry, there should be one more parenthesis here. And now, like you said earlier, 67,11 docs.data. Let's just do docs.data. So like you said earlier, this isn't really displaying anything. Two reasons. Well, one is that the text is here, but the other reason, like you said earlier, is earlier when we went into production versus dev mode, what that did is change the rules. So we're going to go to the rules tab here. For now, let's just say if auth. Yeah, let's just say true for now. We'll come back to that in a second. Does this display? If true. Here. Let me just check one thing real quick. Rules. If request request is not equal to no. So we're allowing the user to read and write to the database if their authorization is not null. And then right now it's not displaying anything because of the way we wrote that to the screen. Let's try like doc.id. Maybe that'll display something. No, I think that's also a function. maybe just some text. Hello world. I see. These should be parentheses, not curly braces. Doc dot data dot text. Sure. I think we need to wrap this in a div. Messages and stuff. All right, it's not displaying right now. I'm not sure why, but we'll fix that in a second. So instead of displaying just some dummy data, let's just create the function right now. Let's call it chat message. And it's going to accept some parameters called props. We're going to set the ID field to props. We're going to take these values text, UID, photo URL from the props message, const delete message equals props. This function is going to return a div. So image source is the photo URL that we're pulling. If not the photo URL, then let's just do a value from the folder. Let's just call logo192.png. We're going to set a paragraph tag that just displays the text that's passed in. Let's see if this works. Okay, and again, if the current user is authorized, then we're going to say and button class name. Actually, let's just wait till later to do that part. Const message class equals UID equals auth.current user dot UID sent or received. So this part is going to assign a class to the div. If the user ID is equal to the message is user ID, we're gonna say that it's a sent message. If the user ID is someone else, then it's going to be a received message. And that's important for the styling that we'll import later, but for now, it's just a class name. We'll call the class name message and then message class. These are curly braces. In JavaScript, if you're typing within a string, you can put in curly braces with this $sign in front to reference a variable or something instead. You're right. Yeah. So these are backticks, not quotation marks. The backtick is the button right under your escape key in the top left of your keyboard. Thank you for that. Cool. So now back to the chat room function. Rather than just passing in some dummy data, let's call a chat room, or sorry, chat message. The parameters that we're going to pass into this chat message are the document ID. The ID is going to be also the document ID. The message is going to be the document data. And then we'll close it off for now. Let's see if that is printing. Chat message is not defined. Sorry. Is that printing? Chat message. Messages and docs. Cool. So this is our message. It's styled really weird for now, but what we can do is go back to the Firestore. Goodbye. Thanks for coming. We can go back to the messages if we were to manually add a document the same way. So the text value is going to be testing, and then created at field is going to be the current time and date. So same thing we did earlier. We're just going to manually add this into our database for now. We should see it pop up on our front page, and that's what it does. So for the styling right now, this workshop isn't really CSS focused, so we're just going to import this from the code that I already have up. So if you guys didn't see, it's in the Discord announcements. If you guys want to copy the styling as well, it's the SEC React Firebase workshop GitHub. Essentially, I'm just going to copy this app.css file. If you're interested in styling, I have a workshop that I did I think 2 semesters ago, where we went over Tailwind, and we went over styling in a bit more detail. But for now, I'm just going to copy paste that. So yeah, that should let the chat box look something like this. I'm not sure how many of you are still following along. Can I get a raise of hands who's like made it this far? Okay, sick. Yeah, so now in our final goal, we want it to look something like this, where we have a form at the bottom that lets the user input their own messages as well. Right now, we currently just see the 2 testing messages that we inputted manually through the database. Goodbye. Also, let's test out the sign out functionality. Cool. So sign out, sign in functionality should work if you've followed along so far, what I've done. So right now, what it's actually doing is it's recognizing that the user ID of the person who posted these messages does not match the user ID that I just logged in with. That's why it's showing up on the left side of the screen rather than the right side of the screen. So yeah, back to the code. Again, I'll explain. I know I went over this a bit fast, but messages is just referring to the collection that we define in Firestore. And then for each message, we're mapping the chat message function to that. We're with the key, ID, and message fields right now. So yeah, underneath this, let's create a form. So it's going to be in a form tag. We're going to put an input for value equals the form value. And then let's put a submit button. Type equals submit. Let's call the button send. Form value is not defined. So if you just type that code in, it should look something like this. The form doesn't really do anything so far, because we haven't hooked it up to anything. But what we want that input to do is, again, set that value to form value. And then on change, we're going to set E, which stands for event. And then we're going to call the set form value and then pass in this argument. So now I didn't really define what form value and set form value are. What we're going to do is go up here. Underneath messages, we're going to create a state variable, form value and set form value. All right, so this is also super confusing for those who aren't familiar with React. You'll notice that earlier up, one of the first lines we did was import use state from React. What use state is essentially React's way of defining variables. So this line, what it's doing is creating a getter value, getter method, and then a setter method for the form value. So right now we're initializing that form value variable to just an empty string. And then that setter method, we're going to define, that setter method, once we pass in a value, it's going to set the form value to that new value. So you'll notice that over here, the value that we're manually inputting in that input box is going to be the value of that variable. And then every time the input box is changed, we're just going to change that variable to match. Cool. So in this form, we're going to have an onSubmit function. So when the user submits that form, when the user hits the send button, we want it to update the Firestore database. So let's just say send message. So on submit, we're going to call the function that's called send message. So over here, underneath form value, we're going to define a function and call it send message equals async e equals this. So async, we'll get over why we're using async in a second. But essentially it just means that the function is going to take a bit of time to run. So the parameter we're passing in is the message. In the body of that function, we're going to say e.prevent default. So just the default things that happen with the form, we're just going to stop that for now, override that. We're going to set the user ID and the photo URL to auth.currentUser. I know we're a bit over time. I'm just going to finish this up. If you guys want to watch this again later, I'm going to post this all on YouTube. So definitely check that out if you can't stay. But yeah, await messages ref.add. And then we're going to add a new field, form value, created at. I don't think that's an exit. I think it's exit. I don't think that's an exit. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Firebase, Firestore, field value dot server timestamp. That's a super complex way of just saying like the current time. We're going to pass in the UID, the user ID, and then the photo URL. I don't know if we mentioned this, but the photo URL is taken from the user's Google account, which is cool to talk about once we do it later. So what this is saying is that once the user submits the form, we're going to pass this in to the messages reference that we made earlier. Let's see if that works. Hello. Cool. So that message just updated inside the actual Firestore database from our front end. And you can see the ID is here. Hello all. The user ID is my user ID. the created at is the time, and then the photo URL is just my photo URL. And you can actually see this S is just taken from my Google account. You'll notice one more thing, testing, once we hit submit, we want to clear that form. So we're going to say set form value to null. So when we submit, it clears the form for us. Goodbye. Cool. So that's essentially our chat app. And then you'll see if we sign out and then sign in with a different account. So earlier I logged in with my personal account. Now I'm going to try logging in with my school account. So that same logic that we wrote earlier that said that if the user ID matches the messages user ID, we're going to put it on the right side. And then if otherwise, we're going to put it on the left side. You see here. So now since I'm logged in with a different account, it's putting the messages that I just sent from a different account on the left side. So yeah, same logic should work. Everything is being updated in the storage at the same time, which is super cool. Now let's go over how to delete a message. So we have a send message function. Let's also create a delete message function. Async ID equals, and then await messages ref dot doc ID dot delete. So this is just saying from the messages reference, get the message that matches that ID, and then just delete it. But we don't have anything calling that function. Goodbye. Thanks for coming. So what we want to do is to the left of every chat message. Where is it? So in the chat message here, earlier we passed in this delete message prop. So in the chat room function, when we define chat message, we're gonna set the delete message function, delete message. So now from the chat message component, we can actually call that. Cool. So if the user ID matches the user ID of the message, then we'll put a button that says class name equals delete button, on click equals, and then the same logic that we used earlier, that empty function is gonna call the delete message function. And that text is gonna say delete. So let's see what that looks like. Cannot read process. Yeah, I think I need to. All right, so earlier when I manually inputted some of the messages, they didn't input with a UID field. I'm just gonna put something, some dummy values here for now. UID. So let's see if this works now. Cool. So this hover functionality is done in the CSS file that we just imported. We didn't really go over that much, but it's just saying that when the user hovers over, I did something with the authentication, but I think it's fine. When the user hovers over this chat message component, it's gonna appear with this delete function. Otherwise, when the user's not hovering over, it's not gonna display. So if we said something like this, we can just hit delete and then it deletes that from the database. Let's see what else we have to do. So what we've done so far is it's called CRUD operations. You might hear about this if you take something like databases or software engineering. Create, read, update, and delete. We didn't really do the update part, but we showed how you can create a message. We showed how you can read a message with the proper rules. We showed how you can delete a message from the database with the proper rules, of course, because we obviously can't delete someone else's message with this functionality. So those are 3 of the 4 CRUD functions. Are we missing anything else? I believe that should be it. Let me just confirm one more time. All right, there was one more thing I did, it was super small though. Testing. So if I like spam the chat, you'll notice that every time I enter a new message, it doesn't scroll down. What I did in the original code base, this part isn't super important, but in that main chat room, we're just gonna create this reference variable. So this empty div is just gonna call. So up here, we're gonna do constant dummy equals use reference. So that just allows us to refer to that empty div, that ghost div at the bottom of our form. So every time the user sends a message in the constant send message function, where is it? We're gonna say dummy.current.scroll into view, and then behavior smooth. So now you'll notice when we send the message, it scrolls us down to the bottom of that chat room window. Let's see what else I'm missing. Sign in, sign out functionality is complete. And then the app is complete as well. Cool. So that's the majority of our app. Or I believe that's all we have covered for you today. Yeah, any questions so far? So I know we covered a ton. What actual website? This thing? Did you run npm start in the terminal? I had a bunch of errors. I'll come back to you after this and then we'll try to figure those out. But essentially what npm start does is it goes through these classes one by one. So it runs index.js. Index.js is pulling this app component. And then this app component is all of the 150 something lines of code we just wrote. You don't have index.js? All right. I'll come to you afterwards. We'll try to fix it out. Does anyone else have any questions so far? We covered a ton of stuff, so I don't expect you to like understand all this, but we're gonna post not only the slides but the GitHub later on, as well as the recording if you want to watch it back over. But yeah, I think React is super useful. I've used it in a ton of projects, personal projects, school projects, for hackathons as well. Firebase is useful if you want to do anything that requires a database. What you'll notice is with any other React app, if I were to refresh the page, none of those values save. Or if I open this up again, say like in a private tab, well, I have to sign in first, so I can't really do that. If I open it up in a new tab, those messages are still persistent, which is super cool. Because now we are able to log in to our actual Google account and then see messages that are attributed to us and then to other people as well. And this is just like a basic demonstration. I hope you guys were able to take something from it. I know we went over a lot. I know we went over time by like 20 minutes, but yeah, if you guys don't have any other questions, I'll just like walk around afterwards and help you guys out if you have any errors. But yeah, thank you so much for coming.